A powerful German Shepherd puppy rescue story that starts with a vet bill instead of a happy family photo. I was a 72-year-old man in Sarasota, Florida, just paying for a stranger's dying puppy on a screen, never imagining she was about to rewrite the rest of my life. It was late morning, the kind of Florida sunlight that makes the linoleum in my old kitchen look almost clean. I sat at my scratched wooden table, pill organizer on one side, cold coffee on the other, while my grandson's tablet glowed in front of me like it belonged to another century. "Look, Grandpa," Liam said, sliding the screen closer with one fingertip. "A German Shepherd puppy at the emergency vet. They're trying to raise the money for her surgery." On the screen, a little sable puppy lay in a clear plastic box, wrapped in wires and tape, one paw shaved where the IV went in. Her name, Hazel, was written in purple marker on a strip of tape stuck to the crate, right above a bright yellow folder taped to the side with the words "Vet Bill" in heavy black letters. That was the whole picture. Not a family, not a backyard, not kids hugging her, just a rescued puppy halfway between staying and leaving, and a number on that folder big enough to make my chest hurt. I live on a fixed retirement check now, the kind where you know the price of every prescription before the pharmacist rings it up. Most days, my biggest decision is whether to cut my blood pressure pills in half or not. Big choices, life-changing choices, those were supposed to be behind me, but Hazel was staring straight through that plastic box and straight through the glass of the screen, eyes too serious for a baby dog, like she was asking quietly if anyone out there was still listening. Something about that look dug up an old ache I thought I'd buried, along with another dog, a long, long time ago. "Grandpa, you don't have to," Liam said softly. "People are just sharing it. You're not responsible or anything." That "don't have to" hit me in a place no doctor's ever found with a stethoscope. I stared at the yellow folder, at the trembling little chest under the wires, at the progress bar crawling under her picture. My finger hovered over the pay button, and for a second I heard my own head arguing about numbers and age and how sensible old men behave. Then I exhaled, touched the screen, and watched it blink as almost the entire bill vanished in one click. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding harder than it had any right to, realizing too late that I hadn't just paid a balance. I'd started something I didn't yet have a name for. The next morning, I drove to the animal hospital telling myself I was just checking on a bill, not on a life. Inside, it smelled like bleach and wet fur and stale coffee. I gave my name at the front desk and asked about the German Shepherd puppy from the fundraiser. The receptionist slid a visitor sticker toward me and nodded down a narrow hallway. Hazel was in a glass front kennel off the treatment area, a clear box with wires, tape, and a rolled towel for a pillow. She wore a soft cone around her neck, one leg shaved for the IV, her chest rising too fast under a thin blanket. Her whole body trembled, but when she saw me, her tail tapped the towel, slow and uneven. On a bench nearby sat a young woman in a coffee shop apron, fingers locked around a paper cup. Her eyes were red, and a vet tech crouched beside her, speaking softly. "The bill is covered," the tech said. "One donor paid the full amount last night, so we can move forward with surgery." The girl let out a breath that shook her shoulders. "I don't know how to thank him," she whispered. "I don't even know his name." I stayed a few steps away, pretending to study a poster while I watched her press her cheek against Hazel's neck. Hazel leaned into her and then turned her face back toward me like she was trying to hold on to both of us at once. A doctor stepped in with a chart and tired lines around his eyes. "Today we prep," he said quietly. "Surgery is this afternoon, and I have to be honest. Her chances are about 50-50. Hazel's tail tapped the towel one more time, a stubborn beat against uncertainty. When I got back from the clinic that afternoon, the house felt too quiet. I set my keys down and just stood there, listening to the fridge hum and the clock tick. Liam came by after class, letting himself in with that half-knock kids use when they already belong somewhere. "How's the puppy?" he asked, backpack sliding off his shoulder, eyes on my face instead of the TV. I told him Hazel was in her crate with a cone and an IV, tail still trying to wag like she didn't understand numbers or odds. I tried to sound calm, like I'd simply donated to a good cause, not tied my old heart to a rescued puppy on a hospital table. That night, I never made it to bed. I sank into my recliner, and let the dark settle on my shoulders. Soon I was 12 again, standing in a muddy yard with a mud at my feet. My father said, "We can't afford a vet for a dog," and the words hit harder than the car had, hanging in the air. That was the day I learned money could choose whether a dog lived or died, and some part of me decided not to risk that kind of loss again. After my wife was gone and our last old dog slipped away, I told everyone I was done with pets, but really I was just done with goodbyes. Maybe that's why Hazel's picture cut so deep, why my hand moved on that vet bill before my head could argue. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed, loud in the quiet room. A tired voice from the clinic said, "She's out of surgery. She made it. She's a tough little girl." I heard Carla crying softly somewhere behind her, and then the nurse added, "But we do need to talk about the next steps." By the time I got back to the clinic, the word "made it" didn't feel as simple as it sounded on the phone. Surviving was one thing. Living with what came after was another. Hazel was back in the same clear box, a little less pale, a little more aware. The German Shepherd puppy lifted her head when I walked in, cone crooked, eyes still heavy from medicine, but following me like I was someone she recognized. The doctor met us in a small consult room that smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had died hours ago. He laid her chart on the table and talked in that careful voice people use when they're trying not to scare you but refuse to lie. She'd need medication for weeks, maybe months, follow-up visits, x-rays. There might be rehab later, slow walks, gentle exercises, someone who could watch for every limp and flinch. Across from me, Carla sat with her hands locked around another paper cup. She listened, nodded, and then shook her head all at once. "I worked 2 shifts already," she said, voice cracking. "My landlord's already mad about the barking. If I take more hours to pay for her meds, she'll just be alone again in that tiny apartment." She reached over and slid her fingers under Hazel's cone, scratching that soft place behind her ear. "I love her," she whispered. "I really do. I don't know how to do this without hurting her more." A woman from the rescue stepped in then, folder pressed to her chest like a shield. "We do have someone who covered her entire bill," she said gently. "Sometimes people like that are open to fostering, even adopting, if it feels right." It took me a second to realize both of them were looking at me. I almost laughed, except nothing about it was funny. "I just paid a bill," I said too quickly. "I'm not a hero, and I'm not a new owner. I'm old, my knees sound like popcorn, and I barely keep up with my own prescriptions." Hazel shifted, pressing her nose to the edge of the crate, breathing in my hand like she was committing the smell to memory. Carla bent over her, mumbling apologies into that warm fur, and Hazel's eyes slid back to me again, steady and questioning. The rescue woman tilted her head, voice dropping like we were in church. "Would you at least meet her properly?" she asked. "Just once, sit with her." So I came back the next afternoon with Liam. They led us to a corner kennel where Hazel was resting, cone still on, eyes a little clearer than before. The door clicked open, and the German Shepherd puppy hesitated on the threshold. She tested her weight on that bad leg, then took a few wobbly steps, claws ticking on the floor. Liam dropped to the ground without thinking. Almost out of habit, he pulled out his phone and hit record, just a little video for himself. "You kids film everything," I muttered, lowering myself down beside him a lot less gracefully. "If I'd had a camera at your age, I'd just have shaky footage of muddy boots and broken lawnmowers." Hazel sniffed his shoe, his jeans, the sleeve of his hoodie. Then she walked past his open hands and came straight to my knees like she'd already made up her mind. She laid her head on my leg, heavy and warm, eyes closing like she'd finally found a place that wasn't moving or beeping. For a minute, it was just me, that rescued puppy, and the sound of her breathing settling into something softer. Liam watched us and shook his head. "She picked you," he said quietly. "She looks at you like you're safe." I didn't feel safe. I felt like a man who'd stepped into deep water without checking the depth. But I rested my hand on her neck anyway, feeling the slow thump of her heart. After a while, the rescue coordinator came over with a clipboard. "There are a few families asking about her," she said. "If you're feeling anything at all here, Mr. Walters, we'll need to know in the next few days." At home that night, I spread my bills out on the kitchen table like a deck of bad cards. Electricity, property tax, the list from the pharmacy, a grocery list scribbled in my own shaky handwriting. The numbers lined up in neat little rows, each one asking the same quiet question. Where exactly does a healing puppy fit into this? Liam sat across from me, elbows on the table, pushing a pen back and forth with his thumb. I can pick up more shifts, he said. I'll cancel a couple of subscriptions, sell my old game console, dog food, treats, whatever she needs. I can help. I looked at this 20-year-old kid offering to trade late nights and streaming for bags of kibble and vet visits. Part of me wanted to tell him it was too much, that a rescued puppy was more than just an item in a budget. Another part of me was back in our old bedroom, years earlier, before the wrinkles and the pill boxes. My wife sat on the edge of the bed, tissues in her hand, our old dog sleeping his last days in the living room. We can't do this again, she'd whispered. No more dogs. I can't go through losing another one. Back then I agreed, because fear sounded a lot like wisdom. Now, staring at Hazel's name written on a sticky note beside my calculator, I felt like I was standing at the edge of that promise with one foot already over the line. Maybe I was betraying an old vow. Or maybe I was finally admitting it had been built on pain, not love. I looked at Liam and saw more than a kid with a phone. I saw someone who could learn what responsibility felt like when it had warm fur and trusting eyes. We'll tell them we'll foster, I said at last, voice rough. Just foster, for now. But in my mind, I could already see Hazel asleep on the rug in my living room, like she'd been there her whole life. A week later, we sat at a small metal table in the rescue office, pen in my hand and Liam shifting from foot to foot beside me. The papers were stacked neatly, full of fine print, but the only word I really saw was adoption, staring up at me like it had been waiting there all along. Hazel lay on a blanket at our feet, cone gone now, stitches neat and small, watching every movement like it might matter to her. When I signed my name, the pen shook a little, and she lifted her head as if she could feel the moment land. Carla came in holding a small cardboard box against her chest. Inside was a worn-out leash, a cheap blue rubber ball with tiny teeth marks, and a folded scrap of cloth that smelled faintly like coffee in her apartment. I'm sorry it's not more, she said, blinking hard. She deserves better things than I can give right now. I told her the only honest thing I could. You did what you could, I said quietly. You asked for help. That's not failure. She knelt on the floor, wrapped her arms around Hazel, and pressed her face into that soft fur one more time. The puppy wiggled between us, moving from her hands to mine, from her scent to my shoes, like she was trying to hold on to two different versions of home. Then Hazel stepped back, looked up at Carla, and finally walked over to me, laying one paw right on top of my old leather shoe. It was a small, trembling touch, but it felt like a decision. The front door swung open when we were done, letting in a slab of bright Sarasota sunlight. Hazel squinted, took a careful step onto the warm concrete of the parking lot, and walked out by my side as a dog with a new family, whether I was ready for that word or not. Hazel paused on the threshold like the doorway itself was asking a question. My little house smelled of old books, laundry detergent, and the sharp edge of pill bottles, but to her it was all new territory. She took a cautious step onto the hallway rug, nose low, tail giving these small, uncertain swishes. Every few inches she stopped to breathe in another patch of my life, like she was reading it in a language only a puppy understands. Liam went straight to work, more confident than I felt. He set two stainless steel bowls by the kitchen doorway, showed me where he thought her bed should go, away from drafts and close enough to see me in my chair. After walks, we rinse her paws here, he said, turning on the bathroom tap to a gentle stream. Not hot, not cold. And when we bathe her, we keep the water below the stitches, just a quick wipe with a cup, okay? Hazel tolerated the first paw washing with a mix of suspicion and bravery, that stubborn little chest rising and falling while the towel moved over her toes. When we were done, she shook once, soft ears flapping, then trotted into the living room like she had always owned it. It didn't take long for the first mistake. One moment I was admiring how small she looked on the big rug, and the next there was a warm puddle spreading into the fibers by her back paw. Hey, no, I snapped, louder than I meant to. Hazel, no. She jerked back like I'd hit her, ears glued to her head, eyes wide and wet. For a second, I didn't see a young German Shepherd puppy at all. I saw my own kid flinch in a doorway years ago when my temper was faster than my patience. The guilt hit harder than the smell of the accident. I dropped to my knees slower than I wanted, joints protesting, and sat there on the floor beside her. "I'm sorry, girl," I said, voice low. "I forgot you're just learning. That's on me, not you." We ended up in the bathroom again, me with a towel, her fur damp and warm under my hands as I wiped away the soap. She leaned her weight against my thigh, forgiving me faster than I ever forgave myself for anything. Later, when the rug was clean and the house was quiet, Hazel slept with her nose against my slipper, like it was something worth guarding. I sat in my chair feeling every year, every bill, every promise I'd ever made to be better than the man I used to be. The phone rang just as the sun started to slide down behind the palms outside. It was the vet, calm but serious, asking us to bring Hazel in for a checkup. "We need to talk about long-term mobility," she said, and my hand tightened around the receiver while Hazel snored softly at my feet. The exam room was quiet except for the soft click of Hazel's nails on the tile and the rustle of the vet's coat. The doctor bent gently over her, moving one back leg with slow, careful hands while Hazel watched his face. "As a German Shepherd puppy after this kind of trauma," he said, "she may always have a little limp. She'll likely need occasional physical therapy, maybe joint support later in life. It's all manageable, but it does add up." I nodded like someone reading a weather report, but what I heard was dollars and years stacking themselves into a tall, wobbling tower. Medications, checkups, therapy sessions, special food. "If that feels like too much," he added, softer now, "there are rescue programs that can place her with someone who has more financial flexibility. You've already done so much for her." In my head, the numbers started marching. Mortgage tax, electric bill, pills in the little plastic box, the groceries I stretch out over a week. There was a sharp, familiar shame in wondering if I was simply too old and too poor for this brave little life I'd helped save. For a second, I heard my father's voice again, the one that said, "We can't afford a vet for a dog," and walked back into the house. I could feel myself teetering on the edge of the same excuse, the same door. Hazel shifted on the mat, then limped off it altogether, determined in that stubborn way only a young dog can be. She crossed the small gap between us, nose lowered, and pushed her face into my open hand like she was choosing where to stand. Her fur was warm, her breath damp on my skin, and in that moment I knew her life and mine were already woven together. There wasn't any clean way to unbraid them without breaking something important in both of us. "No," I said quietly, mostly to the ghost of my younger self. "She stays with me. We'll figure it out, whatever it takes." On the drive home, I told Liam what the vet had said, my fingers tight on the steering wheel. That night, we sat at the kitchen table again, crossing out takeout meals, extra channels, little comforts we could live without. Hazel paced the hallway while we worked, slow and determined, testing her leg in the space between my bedroom and the front door. On her last pass, she didn't look down at her feet at all. She just looked up at me and kept walking, each step a little steadier than the one before. Time did what it always does if you let it. It slipped into a quiet routine, built around the sound of Hazel's paws on my floors. She sprawled under my desk while I paid bills, breathing slow and deep like the world wasn't such a dangerous place after all. On the old sofa, she'd drift into dreams, letting out these soft little groans, paws twitching at whatever she was chasing behind her closed eyes. Every afternoon, she'd wait by the front door, ears pricked, tail starting to drum the second Liam's keys hit the lock. He'd drop his backpack, and that rescued puppy would act like he'd been gone a year instead of a few hours. One night, a storm rolled in from the Gulf without much warning. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows, and the lights blinked once, twice, then went out. For a moment, I was back in another kind of dark years ago when bad news came by telephone and hospital hallway. My chest tightened, breath catching that old familiar panic rising up like it had just been waiting for an excuse. The house felt too big and too empty, every shadow a little louder than it needed to be. I sat there in my chair, hands useless on the armrests, telling myself I was too old for this kind of fear. I heard Hazel jump down from her spot on the rug, claws clicking softly in the black. She found me without seeing me, pressed her warm body against my legs, then climbed half into my lap like I was the one who needed shelter. She laid her head on my chest and let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind you hear when someone decides they're staying. Her heartbeat thumped steady against my ribs, pulling mine back into rhythm. That was the moment I understood what I'd really brought into this house. Not just a dog recovering from surgery, but a small, stubborn life that refused to let me disappear into my own loneliness. Somewhere between one thunderclap and the next, my shoulders loosened and my eyes closed. I fell asleep with my hand on her back, feeling like someone had finally come to stand watch over me. In the pale light of morning, Liam let himself in and stopped in the doorway. He saw his grandfather snoring softly in the recliner, and Hazel curled around me like a guard, eyes half open, still on duty. Later that day, once the power was back and the coffee was brewing, I looked at her and made up my mind. We should have everyone over, I told Liam. Your mom, your uncles, the kids. It's time they met the one I paid the bill for, and the one who's been paying me back ever since. We picked a Saturday when the weather was kind, and the mosquitoes were still deciding if it was worth coming out. By noon, my little backyard was full of plastic chairs, folding tables, and the sound of kids trying to talk louder than the grown-ups. Hazel trotted from group to group, our once rescued puppy weaving through legs and lawn chairs like she was checking her guest list. She still had a bit of a hitch in that back leg, but nobody seemed to notice except me. On the fridge inside, the old vet bill was pinned under a magnet shaped like a seashell. Next to it, Liam had taped 2 photos side by side, one of Hazel in her clear hospital crate and one of her sprawled on the rug by my fireplace, paws in the air, utterly at peace. At some point, Liam ended up in the middle of the patio, everyone listening while he talked about early mornings with Hazel. "How bad was it?" my daughter asked, half joking. He shrugged and said, "Let's just say walking a dog is better therapy than scrolling a phone at 3 in the morning." He told them how those walks dragged him out of his own head, out of the little dark pocket he'd been carrying around since high school. Hazel stood by his knee while he spoke, looking up every time he said her name like she knew exactly what he was admitting. I watched it all from my old lawn chair, taking it in the way only someone with more years behind than a head can. This little dog had taken a family that was drifting into its separate screens and pulled us back into the same yard, the same stories, the same shared air. There was laughter, burned edges on the burgers, a neighbor leaning over the fence to say hello, old songs playing from a speaker that kept cutting out. Hazel's tail never really stopped moving, like she was keeping time for all of us. When the sun went down and the last car pulled away, the yard fell quiet again. I sat on the front porch in my rocking chair, the boards creaking under me, the night soft and full of crickets. Hazel settled at my feet, then lifted her head and laid it on my knee, staring out at the same dark yard I was looking at. We breathed in the silence together, 2 lives that had somehow ended up side by side. I used to think paying that bill was just about money. Now I know it was my second chance, too. If you're still listening to an old man's voice after all this, I want to tell you one last thing. That little click on a vet bill I made in my kitchen didn't just change a puppy's chart in some computer. It reached into the last years of my life and gave them a shape I didn't know I was allowed to have again. A lot of us, once we get past a certain birthday, start telling ourselves the same story. Too late, too tired, too old for new pain. We forget that sometimes the quiet decisions we make when nobody's watching become the most important promises we ever keep. I thought I was rescuing a dog from a number on a piece of paper, but this rescued puppy is the reason my mornings start with paws on the floor instead of silence, and my nights end with a warm weight leaning against my leg when the house feels too big. She pulled me back into walks and laughter and people and the simple work of filling a bowl and wiping muddy footprints off the tile. If you're my age or somewhere close, I know money is real and grief is real. I know it hurts to open your heart when it's already full of missing faces. But I'm asking you to look at the empty spaces anyway and imagine what one dog, one small life, could do in them. Maybe you can't adopt, and that's all right. You can visit a shelter, sponsor a kennel, help pay a bill, share a link so someone else can see the eyes you saw. You can show the younger ones in your life that compassion isn't something we grow out of. It's something we grow into. Little choices like that keep places like your local rescues alive. They keep small channels like Brave Paws telling these stories so the next puppy on a cold table isn't alone when the numbers start to climb. Every time you share a story, leave a comment, hit a simple button. You might be nudging the right person toward their own pay moment and another dog toward a home. So, if this touched something in you, don't just wipe your eyes and move on. Carry it to someone. Tell your kids, your grandkids, your neighbor who still misses the dog they lost. Let this be the start of a promise, not the end of a video. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.